of respectability can mask the darkest of souls.
This isn't average.
A brilliant mind plots a gruesome revenge.
They were dealing with someone who is pure evil.
The desire for a new life ends in a callous death.
A cold-blooded, sadistic, selfish killer.
Amen.
And a devout Christian is a secret sinner.
And she wanted to satisfy her.
Professor Amy Bishop has it all. Neurobiologist, mother of 4, and a Harvard graduate with a PhD in genetics.
Amy was exceptionally bright and talented.
Good morning, Professor Bishop. All ready for your first date?
Yes, thanks. Although it's not.
In 2003, Amy lands a coveted place in the biology department of the University of Alabama.
Amy Bishop was Harvard trained, and that's how she introduced herself.
She has a grand sense of self-importance, that she was better than everyone else because she had went to Harvard, and she reminded people of that on a continuous daily basis.
But there's only one problem. Amy is a terrible teacher.
She was really not equipped for what she was hired to do.
Does that sound right to you?
I'm not sure.
Excuse me, Professor?
Professor?
Will you stop wasting my time?
I just wanted to know if the
Stop!
Immediately, she is getting, I guess, bad reviews and bad reports from the people that she works with.
If you have to keep asking questions, you shouldn't be here.
She was obnoxious. She was loud.
I just wanted to shut up now!
Most people just stayed away from her.
Amy's behavior is no better off campus.
Who wants pancakes?
Oh, yeah.
I want to.
Even when she's out for breakfast with her family.
Excuse me. We need a booster.
I am very sorry, but they're all being used by other customers. We don't have any others left.
Amy was enraged that another woman would get the booster seat for her family.
This is ridiculous. I am Professor Amy Bishop. I went to Harvard.
She advises the person that she is Amy Bishop and that she went to Harvard.
Can I help you?
Give me that booster seat.
No, we're using it.
There's something that she wants and somebody else has it, she's gonna come after you.
What do you think that means? You need to go back to your seat.
Who do you think you are? How dare you?
What are you doing?
Stand up, woman!
Amy ends up slugging her in the face.
Give me that booster!
Here's this middle-aged woman with her husband and 4 kids hitting another woman with kids in the face.
Woman!
That is narcissistic rage. I am Amy Bishop. I want something and I should get it. And if you get what I want, I get to hurt you.
To avoid being charged, Amy agrees to attend an anger management course. But this isn't her first brush with the law. Back in 1986, 21-year-old Amy is still living with her parents
I got my results.
and brother Seth,
All A's, taught my class.
even though he's 3 years younger.
You guys not? I'm trying to play.
Amy's brother often steals her thunder.
What's so special? I get good marks all the time.
Academics came really easy to Seth, and they didn't come easy to Amy. So I think that fueled some sibling rivalry there.
But Seth just topped his class.
So what?
Let's not fight. Amy, keep playing.
No. I'm done.
For Amy, it was more than just maybe some competition. It became really personal.
Congratulations, brother.
Amy. Amy.
But soon their sibling rivalry is brought to a sudden halt. After a family argument, Amy finds her father's shotgun.
Amy Bishop was messing around with it. She was kind of brooding.
She went into her bedroom with a shotgun and pulled the trigger.
But that's just target practice.
Amy, what are you doing? Amy, put that down! Amy!
She leveled the shotgun
Amy, put that down!
at her younger brother,
Amy, don't point it at anyone!
pulled the trigger,
It hit him square in the chest, through his heart. He was mortally wounded.
She said it was an accident. She said that she was playing with the gun and it accidentally went off.
I don't think that was an accident.
Amy refuses to cooperate with the police.
Amy, you need to tell me what happened. You're not doing yourself any favors by remaining silent.
And soon she won't have to.
Officer Bruce, I'll take it from here. Amy, would you like to come with me?
Her mother and the chief of police at that time were extremely close.
Oh, thank you. I've already lost a son. I don't want to lose a daughter.
What she didn't really understand was the moment Amy pulled the trigger, she lost both of them.
Incredibly, her brother's death is ruled an accident.
And it all just kind of gets swept under the rug.
And young Amy Bishop learns a lasting lesson.
The idea is put in her head that she can get away with things that other people wouldn't be able to get away with.
Professor Amy Bishop is about to be shown the door at her university. She's lost tenure because her research isn't good enough.
This is ridiculous. I want answers. Who?
The denial of tenure is a death sentence for a professor.
You are all against me because I am smarter.
It's adios, and somebody else is given a chance.
I am from Harvard.
So everyone is surprised when on February 12th, 2010,
So that will start next semester. Does anyone have any questions?
Amy turns up for a faculty meeting to discuss the next
Nothing
semester.
to add to the meeting?
No, I think that covers it all.
They were very surprised and a little bit uncomfortable because they knew that she had been denied tenure.
But okay, she's still one of the staff. Everybody's friendly to her.
She sat and listened for about 30 minutes.
Does anyone have any questions?
Amy calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a 9mm pistol.
She went on a killing rampage.
And just methodically goes around the room shooting people execution style.
Oh my God.
I wouldn't be surprised to know that Amy's pulse didn't go up during the massacre. Why would it? She was cool, calm, and collected.
Amy intended to kill everybody in that room.
But her pistol jams, and the staff fight back.
These are not trained medical professionals. They're not soldiers. They are normal folks just like you and I. And the next thing you know, they're doing their best to keep their coworkers alive.
Amy kills 3 of her colleagues and leaves 3 others fighting for life.
When she's asked about the people that have died, she says, no, they're still alive.
We know you were there, Amy.
I wasn't there. I don't remember even being there.
You were there. And 3 people are dead.
Nothing happened.
The police believe Amy's mad scientist act is merely legal strategy.
She began her insanity defense the second that the police put her in handcuffs.
Stop the lies.
Do you have any idea who I am? I went to Harvard. When you get a PhD, then you can come talking to me.
Amy Bishop is charged with capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder.
She demanded that everybody, including the guards, call her Dr. Bishop.
To avoid a death sentence, she pleads guilty and in 2012 is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
Amy Bishop is completely and utterly evil. She is a bad human being.
I think she was a ticking time bomb, and that it was going to go off at some point.
You are all against me because I am smarter.
Amy has a grandiose opinion of her talent.
What are you doing? Give me that booster!
But in every aspect of her life, she scores an F.
We like to think that really smart people are above murder. She proves otherwise. Professor Amy Bishop had a PhD in murder.
Some women get a second chance at life.
Each employment lasted just weeks.
Pack your bags.
But nothing's going to change
Things couldn't get much worse.
if they make the same mistakes.
She's starting to really boil over. Women in her position rarely got to choose. It was whatever they could do to make a living, whatever they had to do to make a living.
But Bridget has instant success. Within weeks, she's working as a maid for a wealthy family in New Jersey.
She went back into domestic services, what she knew how to do.
Bridget, have you finished the fireplace?
Yes, ma'am.
There's still clouds of soot coming out of it.
But it didn't go well.
There's tarnish on this handle. Do it again. I expect better.
Either she was incompetent, she was lazy, or they perhaps didn't like her performance.
She lost that position.
Bridget finds another job, but her bad luck travels with her.
Everywhere Bridget went, disaster struck.
Each employment lasted just weeks.
Oh, Bridget, not again. I've had enough. Pack your bags.
She's poor, she's uneducated, she's away from her country. Things couldn't get much worse for Bridget, but they were about to. It's easy to understand why Bridget didn't get it.
I'll call again in 2 weeks and check on her progress.
She won't be here. I have no room for a servant who can't work.
The doctor comes to her rescue.
Whether it was because he wanted to study her or just needed a servant or both, he hired Bridget.
Mary, this is Bridget, our new maid.
Isn't she your patient?
Yes, I can take care of her much better if she stays here.
William's wife, Mary, isn't so sure about her husband's new pet project.
Mary wasn't really that crazy about Bridget.
The two women are polar opposites.
Mary was beautiful, educated, kind.
She was well-liked by her neighbors, beloved by her family. And these are all things that escaped Bridget in her life so far.
Bridget was jealous of her. She wanted her husband and she wanted her lifestyle.
An uneasy truce descends on the household as Bridget plays maid to the doctor's young daughter, Mamie.
She's starting to have these thoughts, like maybe I can replace Mary in the household somehow. I'm already taking care of the child. I take care of the house. This could all be mine.
Bridget, you haven't cleared breakfast. We'll get rats.
It was inevitable that Mary and Bridget would lock horns.
Apologies, Mom.
When Bridget openly defies Mary's instructions,
I'll feed her. You do your work.
No, I'll do it.
it's the final straw.
Mary was not going to put up with this nonsense from a woman she didn't even really like to begin with. Bridget was out, and that was really the seed, the kernel, for Bridget to feel resentment.
And that would be the beginning of the end for Mary Coryell.
New York, 1867.
Welcome to New York, Miss Durgan.
Bridget Durgan has left behind a life in Ireland for a new beginning.
Pack your bags!
But she can't hold down a job. On February 25th, Bridget is packing to leave after falling out with her latest mistress, Mary Coryell.
She was told to pack that night and leave the next day.
Another house call?
I'm afraid so.
And then that night, Dr. Coryell was called away.
Have you everything you need?
I'm set to be gone in the morning, sir.
I'll make sure I'm here to see you off.
Outwardly, Bridget seems to accept her fate, but inside, it's a different story. Mary has not only taken away her livelihood, but any chance of winning Dr. Coryell's heart.
In Bridget's mind, she thought if she got rid of Mary, the path would be clear for Dr. Coryell to marry her and raise his daughter.
Bridget won't let this be her last night with the good doctor.
Bridget thought now is the time. Bridget crept into Mary's room.
Bridget?
Mary awakens with a start.
What are you doing?
She attacked Mary, and it was a tremendous struggle. Clumps of Mary's hair were ripped out of her head.
Bridget plunged a knife into her chest.
Bridget just began to stab wildly at Mary. Mary was going to suffer for every wrong that she'd had to endure in her life.
When the weapon fails to kill her victim, Bridget resorts to animal instinct.
She bit her in the neck.
Biting one's victim during a murder is a very savage, animalistic Then she closed the door and ran from the home with Mamie.
Gregory's house is on fire.
Bridget went to the neighbors.
Robbers broke in. Please help us.
She said strangers came and they're burning the house down.
They killed Mary, but Mamie and I were lucky to get out.
Unfortunately for Bridget, the neighbors are too good at firefighting. The house is not burnt to the ground, and Mary's body still lays in bed for the world to see, complete with shocking bite marks and a gaping neck wound.
One of the first things they did in the investigation was to match Bridget's teeth to the mark on Mary's neck.
And lo and behold, it was a match, as if there was any question.
She was the most obvious suspect from the very beginning. She was immediately taken to jail.
You hungry, Bridget? Try some of that.
When Bridget is arrested for murder, she suffers more seizures. The type which first drew Dr. Coriel to her aid.
She was certainly suffering from some form of epilepsy that caused her to go into a rage.
Bridget. To this day, some believe her illness caused Bridget's murderous rage.
Bridget was found guilty within an hour, and people cheered.
The doctors held in such good standing, and Bridget's crime is so horrific. Thousands pay to watch her die.
What's wrong with her? Give her too much booze.
She was given liquor so that she'd be more amenable to being controlled.
I don't hang women.
The executioner refused to hang her.
What are we gonna do now? I guess we gotta do it.
With a baying crowd to satisfy, it's up to 2 local officials to finish the job.
To say they botched the hanging would be kind. Instead of breaking her neck and doing it quickly, she choked to death just hanging 3 feet off the ground. The murder was sad, the hanging was just as sad.
Destiny and circumstances dealt Bridget Durgan a very bad hand. And eventually, she decided someone had to pay for that.
In a suburban street, the quiet of the night is shattered.
An intruder broke into my house. I had to shoot him.
She had to shoot him to defend herself.
I was terrified.
We didn't expect what ended up coming out.
Her image was more important than his life.
New Albany, Indiana, 2013.
The entire Bible is the inspired work of God.
31-year-old Lisa Schuler and her husband, Brandon, are regulars at their local church.
She was very big in the church community there.
The Bible is without error.
Brandon was also a very strong Christian, and he had a clear moral compass.
Hi. Beautiful service today.
God inspires me every day. Will you both be coming to the Rock Youth Night on Saturday? Of course.
The devout couple, with no children of their own, put their community first.
Children, Lisa and Brandon separated.
She was able to get her own place where she could settle in and restart her life.
The God-fearing good girl, who always put others first, is off the leash.
Lisa was now free for the first time since she had been a young woman, and she could do anything she wanted. And oh boy, did she.
Lisa wants sexual liberation and doesn't seem to mind with whom. She browses internet dating sites.
She wanted to find a man that would satisfy her deepest, basest desires.
Lisa was into sexual role play. One of those role plays was acting out a rape fantasy.
Used to value friendship.
Less than a month after leaving her husband, she finds 49-year-old Charles Pierce.
Lisa was thrilled to find a willing partner to help her live out her fantasies.
You don't like it?
I don't drink that much.
Charles had been looking for that special someone, and he met Lisa. And was she special?
Lisa and Charles had sexual fantasies in common.
Don't think you're gonna get away.
They share a love of bondage.
What she had with Charles was exciting and fulfilled her deepest desires.
Part of their fantasy is photographing their encounters.
She and Charles documented their unusual sexual tastes on his phone.
He acquired quite a collection of Lisa in different positions.
It seemed to be a relationship that was solely based on sexual encounters.
It's a far cry from the sweetness and light of her previous life. The good Christian girl is becoming an amateur porn star.
It was a very charged sexual atmosphere. She was loving every second of it.
But after several weeks, Lisa's past catches up with her. Years of piety start playing on her conscience.
She had a very religious upbringing. She knew what her family expected of her.
Her explicit photos may excite Charles, but they could also damage Lisa's reputation.
Lisa realized if those pictures got out to other people, including her husband, she could lose a lot in her life.
It's one thing to have a spicy sex life. It's completely different to have evidence of it.
Indiana, 2013.
I just want some space.
A once devout Christian, Lisa Schuler has traded in her husband and her religious morals for sexual fantasies. But now her conscience is calling. Regret has set in.
Charles was Lisa's dirty little secret.
Marriage is a sacred vow.
I agree. This is just a break.
Even though it was Lisa that moved out of her home with Brandon, she still was worried about her secret life becoming known.
Lisa hints of her anguish on social media, posting a grim cover photo.
A guilty conscience is a terrible thing. It can cause you to do some really bad things.
She's terrified her lover Charles will share the photos of their kinky escapades.
She worried about those pictures getting out to other people, particularly her estranged husband.
Lisa feels vulnerable that her reputation is now in Charles's hands.
She didn't trust him to keep them secret.
And she decided to do something about it.
Lisa wants to erase all evidence of her secret fantasy. To do that, she needs her lover's phone.
Lisa lured Charles over to her home one more time on the promise of a wild sexual escapade.
She apparently wanted to play out her rape fantasy.
Per agreement, she left her door unlocked. Charles came in while she was washing dishes.
He was more than happy to see her.
But it's not sex Lisa wants tonight.
I can't imagine what he thought when she picked up a gun and started shooting him.
She shot him in a particularly intimate and deeply personal moment. She didn't care about him, exorcising her own guilt.
As he lay there bleeding, she emptied the gun into his chest.
Lisa didn't have to shoot Charles multiple times to kill him, but she wanted to make sure he did not live to tell the tale.
But it's an agonizing death.
He suffered on that floor, slowly bleeding to death and dying right at her feet.
She takes out his phone and tries to delete their interactions together.
What's your password?
Unfortunately for Lisa, she didn't know his password and she couldn't get into the system.
Operator, an intruder broke into my house. I had to shoot him.
Lisa recasts their prearranged role play as a legitimate sexual assault.
She told them an intruder came into the home, made her perform a sex act, and she had to kill him.
I had no choice. I was terrified.
How'd you get in, man?
I don't know.
You wait over there, man.
Lisa's not a criminal mastermind, so clearly it wasn't very well thought out. And they realized that this wasn't just a break-in. There was more to the story.
Lisa may have silenced her lover, but not technology. It doesn't take the police long to discover the victim and assailant are not strangers.
She's still insisting he was an intruder. I don't know who he is.
How do you explain all the messages between you and the deceased? He was your lover, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Lisa very quickly ends up confessing to what happened. Police had her charged with murder within a few hours.
We took photos together.
I didn't want my husband to know.
It was just, he had these photos, and I was worried he was going to show them to my husband.
All Lisa had to do to get rid of the evidence was get rid of the phone. Instead, she gets rid of the boyfriend.
Lisa Schuler pleads guilty to first-degree murder. In 2014, she is sentenced to 45 years behind bars.
It appears that Lisa was motivated to kill Charles out of fear.
Get away from me. Don't.
fear that the world would find out about her kinky sex life. Her image was more important than his life.
Hi. Beautiful service today.
Shame turned a God-fearing do-gooder into a murderer. At her trial, Lisa apologized to her victim's family and her own. Killing was never in her character.
Here's to our new friendship.
But with her reputation on the line, she tried to protect herself in the worst way possible.
Charles was something that could just be tossed aside and have his life ended just to protect what people think of her.
For these deadly women, appearances were deceiving. Professor Amy Bishop thought her qualifications entitled her to kill. Bridget Durgan.
The first thing they remember is the silence, the kind that presses against the ears after a scream has already happened, the kind that lingers in hallways long after the police tape goes up, the kind that turns an ordinary New York apartment building into a crime scene frozen in time. And it starts on a winter night in 1987 when the city is loud everywhere except on the 4th floor of a brick walk-up in Queens, where a door is ajar and a radio is still on, playing low, like someone meant to come back and turn it off. The hallway smells of boiled coffee and damp wool coats. The elevator is broken again, and no one notices anything wrong until morning, until a neighbor knocks and gets no answer, until someone leans in and sees the light still burning, sees the stillness that doesn't belong. Inside, the apartment looks interrupted, not destroyed, a chair slightly pulled back from the table, a coat draped over the arm like it was dropped mid-motion, a half-written note on the counter, pen uncapped, ink drying into nothing. There is no sign of struggle, no shattered glass, no blood spatter that announces itself, just absence, sudden and absolute, the kind that makes detectives lower their voices without being told. The woman who lived here has vanished, and within hours the words start to circulate, first quietly, then louder, then stamped across the city's collective imagination, missing, mysterious, cold case in the making. Her name becomes a headline, then a photograph pinned to corkboards and telephone poles, then a face on the evening news framed by urgent graphics and a toll-free number. She is 29, works late, keeps to herself, known by sight more than by conversation, the kind of neighbor people recognize but don't really know, and that detail will matter later, though no one realizes it yet. Detectives walk the apartment inch by inch, photographing the mundane, cataloging the ordinary as evidence, because in cases like this, the smallest detail can scream the loudest. The radio is noted. The note is bagged. The windows are locked from the inside. There is no forced entry. Her purse is missing, but so are her keys, which could mean nothing or everything. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft and indifferent, erasing footprints before anyone can decide which ones matter. The building itself becomes a suspect in its own way, a vertical village of thin walls and shared spaces, a place where people hear things and don't ask questions, where footsteps blend together and doors open and close all night long. Detectives knock on every door, ask the same questions, write the same answers, nod at the same shrugs. Did you hear anything? No. Did you see anyone? No. What time did you last see her? Not sure. Maybe yesterday. Maybe the day before. Time blurs quickly when nothing seems important until it suddenly is. One neighbor mentions a man in the hallway, maybe tall, quiet, carrying groceries. Another recalls an argument weeks ago, or maybe it was on television, or maybe it was nothing. Statements pile up without connecting, like puzzle pieces from different boxes. The case moves fast at first, driven by urgency and cameras, by the unspoken fear that if a woman can disappear from her own apartment without a sound, then no door is really locked. Police retrace her steps, interview coworkers, scan phone records, comb through her routine, the coffee shop she visits, the subway line she takes, the late shifts that blur into early mornings. They find no threats, no obvious enemies, no dramatic backstory that fits neatly into a crime narrative. She is ordinary in a way that unsettles them, responsible, predictable, careful. The kind of person crime statistics forget until it's too late. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the tone shifts from urgent to concerned to quietly resigned. The headlines change. The phone stops ringing. The investigation slows, then stalls, then hardens into something colder, something heavier, something that refuses to disappear even as everyone else tries to move on. By the end of the year, the words cold case appear for the first time, slipped into a sentence almost apologetically, as if naming it might make it real. The file grows thick with reports and thin with hope. Evidence is re-examined, then shelved. Leads dry up. Tips come in late at night from people who swear they know something now, years later, after a dream or a memory or a drink too many, but none of it sticks. The apartment is cleaned, repainted, rented to someone new who doesn't know what happened there and doesn't ask. Life in the building resumes its rhythm, but something has shifted, something unspoken, a shared awareness that evil doesn't always announce itself, that sometimes it lives quietly, patiently, close enough to hear the radio through the wall. The years pass and the city changes around the case, new crimes, new fears, new faces cycling through precincts where younger detectives flip through old files like artifacts from another era. The photographs look dated now, the hairstyles, the cars in the background, the grainy quality of the film, but the questions remain sharp. What happened after she turned on the radio? Who walked out of that apartment, and how did they do it without being seen? Why was there no struggle, no noise, no trace? The absence becomes the loudest clue of all, a void that investigators circle again and again without crossing. Occasionally, the case resurfaces in a brief article or a late-night segment, framed as one of New York's enduring mysteries, a reminder that not all stories end with an arrest. Then, quietly, decades later, something stirs. A box is reopened. A name is underlined. Technology has changed, databases expanded, patterns that once hid in plain sight now glow under digital scrutiny. A fingerprint once considered unusable is scanned again. A statement dismissed as irrelevant is read with fresh eyes. The building's old tenant list is reconstructed, apartment by apartment, floor by floor, and a detail emerges that had been there all along, waiting. A man who lived next door. A man whose name appears in the margins of the file more than once, always close, always peripheral, never central enough to demand attention. A man who fit into the building the way furniture does, present but unnoticed, familiar enough to feel invisible. In 1987, he was interviewed like everyone else, asked the same questions, gave the same calm answers. He heard nothing. He saw nothing. He knew her only by sight. He was helpful, cooperative, forgettable. Over the years, his name drifted further from the center of the investigation, buried under more urgent leads, more dramatic possibilities. But now, with time as both enemy and ally, that proximity feels different. Living next door is no longer just a detail. It's a vantage point. It's access. It's opportunity wrapped in normalcy. Detectives begin to wonder what it means to be that close to a mystery for that long, to share a wall with a disappearance, to go on living as if nothing happened. The community reacts with a mix of disbelief and dread as whispers start again, the old headlines resurrected with new urgency, the phrase cold case paired with words like breakthrough and shock. People who lived in the building back then replay their memories, searching for missed signs, strange moments, doors that closed too quietly. The idea that the answer might have been next door all along lands like a punch to the chest, not because it's dramatic, but because it's plausible. Because it suggests that the most terrifying mysteries don't hide in the shadows, but in plain sight, smiling politely in the hallway, returning borrowed tools, carrying groceries up the stairs. As investigators dig deeper, the past and present blur, old interviews layered over new evidence, timelines tightened, assumptions questioned. The man's life unfolds under scrutiny, ordinary on the surface, punctuated by gaps that might mean nothing or everything. Friends describe him as quiet. Neighbors say he kept to himself. No criminal record worth noting. No obvious motive that leaps off the page. And yet, the case pulls toward him with a gravity that's hard to ignore, as if the truth has been orbiting this one detail for decades, waiting for the right moment to snap into focus. But for now, in this moment, nothing is resolved. The file is open. The questions are alive again. The building stands where it always has, brick and mortar holding secrets in its walls. The radio from that night exists only in memory, the song lost to time, but the silence it left behind still echoes. A woman vanished without a trace. A community learned how thin the line between normal and nightmare can be. And somewhere in the space between suspicion and certainty, between what is known and what is only suspected, the cold case breathes, refusing to rest, pulling everyone back to that winter night when a door was left open and a mystery moved in next door. The file doesn't sleep, even when everyone else does, and in part 2 the story tightens, not with answers, but with pressure, the kind that builds when too many coincidences start leaning in the same direction. Detectives return to the building as it exists now, older, louder, layered with decades of lives stacked on top of each other, and they walk the same stairs, count the same steps, measure the same narrow hallway where sound travels strangely, sometimes carrying a whisper, sometimes swallowing a shout. They stand between two doors that once shared a wall and imagine how thin that barrier really was, how easily a voice could pass through, how footsteps could be timed, how familiarity could become camouflage. The idea is unsettling not because it's exotic, but because it's simple, because nothing about it requires a break-in or a struggle or a dramatic moment that would have alerted anyone else. Just proximity. Just access. Just time. Back in 1987, the man next door was a background character, a reliable extra in a city full of them, and the original reports reflect that indifference. His interview transcript is short. He works regular hours. He comes home late some nights. He didn't hear the radio. He didn't hear an argument. He noticed nothing unusual. It's all there in black and white, answers delivered without hesitation, without embellishment, the kind of testimony that slides easily into a file because it doesn't demand follow-up. But now, reading it decades later, detectives linger on the phrasing, the cadence, the confidence with which he claims to remember nothing at all. Memory fades, they know that. But sometimes, so does guilt, and that's harder to quantify. They reconstruct the night minute by minute, not because they expect to find something new, but because repetition has a way of exposing fractures. She comes home from work. She turns on the radio. She starts to write a note. Something interrupts her. There is no sign of panic, no overturned furniture, no broken skin left behind. That absence suggests trust, or at least familiarity, someone who didn't trigger alarm bells, someone who didn't need to force their way in. Someone who might have knocked, or already had a reason to be there. The list of people who fit that profile is short, and it keeps circling back to the same place, the same wall, the same door. Old neighbors are tracked down, some eager to talk, others hesitant, their memories filtered through years of distance and self-protection. One recalls hearing the radio through the wall often, late at night, the sound bleeding softly into his own apartment. Another remembers seeing the man next door in the hallway around the same time the woman disappeared, carrying a bag, maybe trash, maybe laundry, maybe something heavier. No one can say for sure. No one wants to be wrong. But the collective uncertainty itself becomes part of the narrative, a chorus of almosts and maybes that paint a picture without sharp edges. It's not evidence, not in the courtroom sense, but it's atmosphere, and atmosphere matters when you're trying to understand how something like this could happen unnoticed. Technology enters the story like a late-arriving witness, indifferent to nostalgia, ruthless in its precision. A partial print lifted from the apartment back in 1987, once dismissed as smudged beyond use, is scanned again, enhanced, compared against databases that didn't exist when shoulder pads and cassette tapes were still in style. It doesn't produce a clean match, not a name that can be announced at a press conference, but it narrows the field, excludes dozens of possibilities, and quietly keeps one door open. A hair found on the couch, preserved in an evidence envelope yellowed with age, is tested with methods that border on science fiction to the detectives who first worked the case. The results are inconclusive, frustratingly so, but they don't contradict the emerging theory either. The evidence, like the memories, refuses to settle into something definitive. As the focus sharpens, the man's past is examined with a thoroughness it never received before. Employment records, addresses, relationships, small inconsistencies that seemed irrelevant in real time now glow under scrutiny. There are gaps in his timeline, periods where no one can say exactly where he was or what he was doing, but that's true of almost everyone, especially in a city that swallows people whole. Friends describe him as reserved, maybe awkward, someone who preferred routine over risk. Former coworkers remember nothing alarming. No history of violence, no trail of complaints, nothing that screams danger. And yet, the absence of red flags doesn't reassure investigators the way it once might have. Sometimes the most disturbing cases are the ones where the suspect looks exactly like everyone else. The media senses blood in the water and circles back, reviving the story with a modern gloss, pairing grainy black and white photos with sharp graphics and ominous music. Cold case revisited, they say. New suspect emerges. The building's address is spoken again on air, and residents who weren't even alive in 1987 feel the chill of inheriting someone else's unfinished nightmare. The man next door, now older, now aware that his name is being whispered again, offers no public reaction, retreating into silence that can be read as dignity or fear depending on who's watching. Investigators insist they're following evidence, not headlines, but they can't deny the pressure. This time, the city is listening. They attempt to map opportunity, drawing lines between routines, schedules, the rhythms of the building itself. The walls were thin. The floors creaked. Someone attentive could tell when a neighbor was alone, distracted, unguarded. The radio, once just background noise, becomes a potential cover, a way to mask other sounds, intentional or not. It's a chilling thought that something so ordinary could be repurposed into a shield for violence, that the soundtrack of a quiet evening could double as a curtain. The theory gains traction not because it's sensational, but because it fits too well, sliding into the negative space left by the lack of evidence. But for every detail that seems to point in one direction, another pushes back. There's still no body, no weapon, no confession, no witness who can say, with certainty, I saw him do this. The legal standard looms large, an immovable line between suspicion and proof. Detectives argue among themselves, some convinced they're finally close, others wary of tunnel vision, of forcing a narrative onto a case that has resisted resolution for decades. They revisit other possibilities, other people in her life, other paths she might have taken, other outcomes too grim to imagine. The cold case refuses to be cornered, slipping sideways whenever someone thinks they have a grip. The woman at the center of it all threatens to fade beneath the weight of speculation, but investigators fight that impulse, grounding themselves in who she was, not just how she vanished. They reread her notes, talk again to family members who have aged alongside the unanswered questions, people who learn to live with uncertainty as a permanent fixture. For them, the renewed attention is a double-edged sword, a mix of hope and exhaustion, the possibility of truth reopening wounds that never fully healed. They want answers, but they've learned to fear false ones, conclusions that satisfy the public appetite without honoring reality. As winter approaches again, echoing the season when it all began, the case reaches a strange equilibrium, balanced between momentum and doubt. The man next door remains a figure of interest, his proximity an undeniable fact, his involvement still unproven. Detectives prepare for interviews that may or may not yield anything new, aware that time has a way of sanding down edges, of turning sharp memories into smooth, defensible forgetfulness. They know that if this case ever breaks, it won't be with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet detail finally given the weight it deserves. And so the story presses forward, not toward resolution, but deeper into the fog, where every step feels significant and every misstep could send it spiraling back into dormancy. The building stands unchanged, a witness that cannot speak. The radio song remains unknown. The wall between those two apartments feels thinner with every passing day. And somewhere within that narrow space between certainty and doubt, the cold case tightens its grip, reminding everyone involved that living next door to a mystery doesn't mean you understand it, only that you can never fully escape it. Time does something cruel in Part 4. It stretches and compresses at the same time, years folding in on themselves as investigators realize the case is no longer just about what happened in 1987, but about everything that happened afterward because nothing did. The absence becomes its own event, a long, slow aftermath that seeps into records, memories, and lives. Detectives sit in fluorescent-lit rooms late at night, the old files spread open like a map that leads everywhere and nowhere, and they begin asking a different question, not who could have done this, but how someone could live so close to a vanishing and leave nothing behind. Not even a rumor solid enough to cling to. That question changes the temperature of the room. It reframes the man next door not as a suspect in a moment, but as a presence across time. They dig into his movements after the disappearance, the years that followed like a shadow epilogue to the crime. He didn't flee. He didn't spiral. He stayed in the city for a while, then moved again, each relocation unremarkable, each address blending into the next. No sudden cash. No abrupt lifestyle changes. No dramatic reinvention. It's the kind of continuity that prosecutors hate and defense attorneys love, because it suggests normalcy, because it resists narrative. But to some investigators, it feels wrong in a different way. If he was involved, they argue, this is exactly how you'd do it. You'd stay. You'd age. You'd let time do the hiding for you. Old acquaintances are re-interviewed, people who once shared drinks or office space with him, now older, more cautious, less sure of their recollections. They describe him as controlled, polite, a man who didn't raise his voice, who didn't overshare, who seemed to exist just outside the emotional weather of the room. One former coworker remembers a comment, made years after the disappearance, a casual remark about how people can live next to each other for years without really knowing anything. At the time, it sounded philosophical. Now it lands differently. The problem is memory is a slippery witness, easily influenced by what comes later, and detectives know better than to treat hindsight as fact. Still, they write it down. Still, they underline it. The case file starts to fill with marginalia, handwritten notes from different decades, different hands, all circling the same themes: access, familiarity, silence. A behavioral analyst is brought in, not to profile a killer in the abstract, but to assess the feasibility of the theory that someone could remove a person from a small apartment without alerting anyone else. The answer is unsettlingly simple. Yes, especially if there was trust. Especially if there was no immediate violence. Especially if the goal was control, not chaos. Especially if the building itself helped, its thin walls and shared noises creating a constant, unremarkable hum. Attention returns to the note on the counter, the half-written sentence that ends mid-thought. Analysts debate whether it was interrupted suddenly or paused voluntarily. The ink shows no signs of a jolt, no jagged line where panic might have struck. That suggests calm, at least initially. Someone arrived who didn't set off alarms. Someone she didn't need to run from. Someone who belonged in that space enough to stop the sentence without force. The implications ripple outward, narrowing the circle again, tightening it until it feels claustrophobic. Meanwhile, the city reacts in waves. Each new article sparks a brief flare of outrage, curiosity, armchair theories lighting up late-night radio and online forums. People argue about guilt and innocence as if proximity alone were a verdict. Others push back, warning against the danger of turning a neighbor into a monster without proof. The man next door becomes an idea as much as a person, a symbol of the fear that the worst threats aren't strangers, they're familiar faces we stop seeing clearly. He remains silent publicly, advised to say nothing, to let the process play out, but silence has its own volume, and in a case like this, it's deafening. Investigators attempt one of the hardest tasks in cold case work, separating what feels true from what can be proven. They stage walkthroughs, recreating the apartment as it would have looked in 1987, furniture placed according to photographs, distances measured, lines of sight traced. They test theories quietly, methodically, without cameras, without commentary. Could someone have crossed that threshold without resistance? Yes. Could they have exited unseen? Possibly. Could they have done it alone? That's where the room grows quiet. It's not impossible, but it requires precision, planning, and nerve. It requires someone who knows the building, the routines, the rhythms of the people around them. It requires someone next door. Yet the case resists the final step. No matter how compelling the circumstantial web becomes, it never tightens into a knot. The legal reality intrudes again and again, a hard reminder that suspicion is not justice. Prosecutors review the file and ask the same questions they've asked before. Where is the body? Where is the physical link? Where is the moment you can point to and say, this is where everything changed? Without that, the case hovers in a gray zone, too strong to ignore, too weak to close. The woman's family watches from a distance, weary but attentive. For them, the man next door is not an abstraction. He's a face attached to a possibility, a name that could finally anchor their grief to something concrete. They attend meetings, listen to updates, nod through explanations about standards of proof and evidentiary thresholds. They've learned the language of caution fluently, even as it hurts. They don't ask for certainty anymore. They ask for honesty. Are we closer? Are we further away? The answers are never simple. As months turn into another year of renewed investigation, fatigue sets in. Detectives rotate off the case, replaced by others who must learn it from paper and secondhand passion. Each transition risks losing nuance, the small instincts that don't translate into reports. To counter that, veterans sit down with newcomers and talk through the case not as a checklist, but as a story, emphasizing where it feels wrong, where it pulls, where it refuses to let go. They describe the hallway, the radio, the wall. They describe the man next door, not accusingly, but carefully, as if handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. And then there's the possibility no one likes to say out loud. What if the truth is smaller than expected? What if there is no grand reveal, no dramatic arrest, no moment where decades of silence finally break? What if the cold case remains exactly that, a space where evidence thins and imagination rushes in to fill the gaps? The thought hangs heavy because it means the community may never get the release it wants, only the lesson it didn't ask for. In quiet moments, alone with the file, some investigators admit what keeps them coming back. It's not just the mystery. It's the idea that someone could disappear so completely while the person closest in proximity carried on, untouched by suspicion for so long. That idea gnaws at them, challenges their understanding of how crime is supposed to work. It suggests a world where accountability is not automatic, where being next door is both ordinary and potentially catastrophic. It suggests that the line between safety and danger might be nothing more than drywall and habit. As Part 4 closes, the case stands in a familiar, uneasy place. The man next door remains uncharged. The evidence remains circumstantial. The theory remains compelling. The building remains occupied. Life continues in layers above and below the apartment where it all stopped. And the cold case, older now but no less heavy, settles back into its waiting posture, not dormant, not resolved, just watching as it has for decades, daring someone to finally see what has always been right there on the other side of the wall. By Part 5, the case feels less like an investigation and more like a slow excavation, each layer of time peeled back with care, because one wrong move could collapse everything beneath it. Detectives begin to understand that if the truth exists, it's not hiding in a dramatic act, but in repetition, in the patterns so ordinary they were overlooked for decades. They stop asking what happened that night and start asking what happened every night before it, every quiet interaction, every shared moment of hallway politeness that never made it into a report. The man next door becomes a constant presence in the room even when he isn't there, his routines mapped out not to accuse, but to understand how normalcy can blur into opportunity without anyone noticing. They revisit the building's maintenance logs, an unglamorous trove of details that rarely make headlines. Complaints about noise, requests for repairs, notes about access to apartments when tenants weren't home. It's tedious work, the kind that doesn't feel like progress until suddenly it does. A record shows the man next door had reported an issue with his heating weeks before the disappearance, granting a legitimate reason for him to be in and out, talking to neighbors, familiarizing himself with schedules. It proves nothing on its own, but it adds texture to the picture, a sense of how easily boundaries could blur in a place where everyone shared walls and problems. Investigators look closely at social overlap, the thin threads that connect people who claim not to know each other. Did they ever speak beyond a nod? Did she ever ask him to hold a package, to watch the door, to help with something small? In apartment buildings, trust is often transactional and fleeting, a favor exchanged without names or expectations. Friends of the woman recall her as cautious, but kind, not reckless, not naive, but not cold either. She lived alone. She managed her life well. She didn't broadcast fear. That combination, detectives realize, can be mistaken for availability by the wrong person. The man next door is approached again, this time with the weight of years behind the questions. The interview is calm, controlled, recorded with modern equipment that captures every pause, every shift in tone. He answers as he always has, steady, unflustered, insisting he remembers nothing unusual. He doesn't bristle. He doesn't overreact. He doesn't offer theories or speculation. He stays in his lane, and that restraint is either discipline or deflection depending on who's listening. When asked about the radio, he shrugs. He doesn't remember hearing it. When asked about that night specifically, he says it blends with others. Work, home, sleep. Routine. The kind of answer that makes sense and yet leaves a hollow space behind it. Outside the interrogation room, detectives debate. Some see his composure as confidence born of innocence. Others see it as practice. The danger of cold cases is that time gives everyone, investigators included, too much room to project meaning onto behavior. They remind themselves of that constantly, anchoring discussions to facts, to documents, to what can be proven. And yet, they can't ignore how the case seems to orbit him, how every new angle somehow bends back toward that shared wall. Attention shifts briefly to the possibility of a second person, not as an alternative suspect, but as a theoretical necessity. Could someone have helped? Could someone have known? The idea is explored and mostly discarded, not because it's impossible, but because it complicates a scenario that already fits too well. There is no evidence of coordination, no communications, no shared alibi that suggests a partner. If this was done, investigators conclude, it was likely done alone, quietly, efficiently. That conclusion is both clarifying and disturbing. The media continues its cycle, intensity rising and falling with each rumor of progress. The phrase "lived next door" becomes shorthand, repeated until it feels like a verdict. The public imagination fills in gaps with certainty the evidence can't support. Some demand an arrest. Others demand restraint. The police department walks a narrow line, releasing just enough information to maintain credibility without poisoning a potential case. Every statement is parsed, every word weighed, because in a story this old, perception can become its own kind of evidence, shaping memories, influencing testimony, altering what people think they saw or heard decades ago. The woman's family grows quieter as the spotlight brightens. They've learned that hope is loud at first and heavy later. They listen to updates, ask careful questions, try not to let themselves imagine closure too vividly. For them, the man next door is still a stranger, a figure defined by proximity rather than proof, and that ambiguity is exhausting. They want resolution, but they don't want a mistake to be the thing that finally ends the story. They've lived too long with half answers to accept a false full one. Behind the scenes, investigators chase a final thread from the early days of the case, something mentioned once and never pursued. A report of a strong, unfamiliar odor in the building days after the disappearance, dismissed at the time as trash or plumbing. The report is vague, secondhand, unreliable. But in a case starved for physical outcomes, even the faintest sensory detail is reconsidered. They revisit old city records, sanitation schedules, maintenance work orders, anything that might contextualize that smell. It leads nowhere definitive, but it reinforces a grim possibility that whatever happened ended quickly and decisively, leaving little behind for chance to reveal. The case reaches a strange emotional midpoint here, not closer to an answer, but closer to understanding the shape of the unknown. Investigators accept that they may never prove what they strongly suspect. They prepare for that outcome even as they push against it, because giving up is not an option, but neither is pretending certainty exists where it doesn't. The cold case teaches patience in the harshest way, by offering just enough coherence to keep going and just enough resistance to prevent arrival. As Part 5 draws to a close, the story feels heavier, not with new revelations, but with accumulated weight. The man next door remains free, unchanged by the scrutiny except in the way all attention leaves a mark. The building continues to house lives unaware of the history pressed into its walls. The woman remains missing, her absence now measured in decades rather than days. And the case itself settles into a tense stillness, like a held breath, waiting to see whether persistence will finally crack the silence, or whether this mystery will endure as a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths are not hidden far away, but lived beside, ignored, and carried forward by time. By Part 6, the investigation begins to feel like it's pressing against an invisible ceiling, not because there is nothing left to examine, but because everything left is intangible. Detectives call it the wall, the point where logic and law stop overlapping, where what makes sense no longer guarantees what can be proven. The man next door remains at the center of that pressure, not as a declared villain, but as a gravitational force the case cannot escape. Every attempt to move outward, to reframe the mystery from another angle, bends back toward him, toward that shared hallway, toward the ordinary intimacy of proximity. They decide to confront time itself, treating it not as an obstacle but as evidence. What does it mean to live for decades with an unanswered disappearance next door? They review recordings of his earlier interviews, now digitized, voices from different eras layered side by side. His tone is consistent. His denials are consistent. Even his phrasing barely changes. To some, that consistency suggests truth. To others, it suggests rehearsal so complete it's become second nature. The problem is both interpretations are plausible, and plausibility is not enough. A forensic psychologist is consulted again, this time not to build a profile of a killer, but to assess the psychology of waiting, of holding a secret, if one exists, for years without release. The answer is unsettling. Some people can. Especially those whose lives are built on control, routine, compartmentalization. Especially those who never confess because they don't feel hunted. The psychologist emphasizes that absence of visible stress does not equal absence of guilt. It only means the mind has found a way to live with itself. Detectives revisit the idea of motive, the weakest pillar in the case. There is no clear reason why the woman would have been targeted. No money missing that suggests robbery. No known conflict. No documented relationship. But motive, they remind themselves, is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet fixation. Sometimes it's entitlement. Sometimes it's nothing more than access meeting impulse on the wrong night. Those motives don't leave paper trails. They leave atmospheres, and atmospheres are notoriously difficult to introduce as evidence. The apartment itself becomes a focus again, this time in memory rather than reality. The original photographs are enlarged, enhanced, studied until they resemble abstract art. Shadows are traced. Reflections questioned. A mark on the wall once dismissed as scuffing is reconsidered, not as proof, but as possibility. The couch placement is analyzed again. The distance from the door to the table measured with renewed obsession. Every inch becomes a stage where something might have happened without leaving a mark, a choreography of restraint rather than violence. A new tip arrives, anonymous, thin, impossible to verify. Someone claims the man next door once made an offhand comment years later, something about how easy it is for people to disappear in a city like New York, how no one really watches anyone else. The tip contains no date, no witness willing to attach a name. It's the kind of information that would be ignored in a fresh case and agonized over in an old one. Detectives log it, discuss it, argue over whether it adds anything or merely feeds the narrative they're already leaning toward. In the end, it joins the growing archive of almosts. The pressure from above increases. Command staff wants to know if the case is moving towards something actionable or if it's circling indefinitely. Resources are finite. Time is finite. Detectives defend their work, pointing to the coherence of the theory, the convergence of details, the improbability of coincidence at this scale. They stop short of promising an arrest. They've learned better. Cold cases punish certainty more harshly than ignorance. Meanwhile, the man next door begins to feel the weight of scrutiny in ways that don't make the news. Old acquaintances distance themselves. Casual interactions become strained. He is careful where he goes, what he says, how he is perceived. Innocent or not, he is no longer anonymous, and anonymity was once his greatest asset. Some investigators wonder if this pressure might produce a crack, a moment where restraint slips. Others worry it will only drive him deeper into silence, fortified by decades of practice. The city reacts unevenly. Some people grow impatient, demanding resolution, believing that proximity equals guilt, that living next door is explanation enough. Others grow uneasy with that logic, sensing how easily it could be turned on anyone, how quickly suspicion can harden into belief without crossing the threshold of proof. The case becomes a mirror for larger fears, about neighbors, about privacy, about how little we really know the people who share our walls. Late one night, a detective revisits the earliest days of the investigation, reading the first report again as if for the first time. The language is urgent, hopeful, confident in a way only fresh cases are. There's an assumption running through it, an unspoken belief that answers will come quickly, that someone will talk, that evidence will surface. That belief feels naive now, almost painful. The detective wonders how many choices were shaped by that optimism, how many opportunities slipped by because everyone assumed there would be time later. They consider the possibility that the truth may already be in the file, unnoticed because it doesn't announce itself. Cold cases, they know, rarely hinge on a single revelation. They hinge on recognition, the moment when a detail finally aligns with understanding. But recognition requires context, and context has been shifting for decades. What seemed insignificant in 1987 may be glaring now, and what seems glaring now may still be wrong. As Part 6 closes, the investigation feels suspended, stretched between momentum and restraint. No new evidence breaks the surface. No confession arrives. No dramatic twist redefines the story. Instead, the case deepens, becoming heavier, more internal, less about action and more about endurance. The man next door remains what he has always been in this story, close, plausible, and proven. The woman remains absent, her life reduced to documents and memory, her fate still unspoken. And the cold case, older and more complex with each passing year, continues to test the limits of certainty, asking a question it has been asking since 1987, not just who did this, but how much can we ever really know about the people who live closest to us, and whether knowing is always enough to bring the silence to an end. Part 7 begins with a subtle shift, not in evidence, but in tone, as if the case itself has grown tired of being chased and decided to watch instead. The investigation slows its visible pace, not because interest has faded, but because every move now carries consequences. Detectives understand they are no longer collecting facts, they are testing boundaries, legal, ethical, psychological. One wrong step could poison everything they've built, turn years of careful work into noise. The man next door remains the axis, but now he is less a suspect to be pursued and more a variable to be observed, his reactions measured against silence rather than pressure. They begin to study absence as behavior. What he doesn't say, where he doesn't go, how he avoids certain topics without appearing evasive. Surveillance isn't constant, but awareness is. He knows he's being watched, not officially, not openly, but in the way people know when their name has weighed again. His life narrows. He sticks to routines, avoids excess, minimizes exposure. To some investigators, this is self-preservation. To others, it's containment, a man managing risk the only way he knows how. The truth, as always, refuses to declare itself. A new prosecutor reviews the case with fresh eyes, unburdened by years of emotional investment. She asks uncomfortable questions, not about guilt, but about strategy. If this goes forward, what is the story that will be told in court? Not the theory, not the implication, but the sequence of events that can be proven beyond doubt. The room goes quiet. Detectives lay out what they have: proximity, opportunity, behavioral consistency, unresolved forensic hints. She listens, nods, then asks the question no one wants to answer. Where does certainty enter? No one responds immediately. They all know the answer, and they all know it's not enough. The conversation turns to risk. If they push too hard without proof, they risk losing the case forever. Double jeopardy isn't the concern, but credibility is. Once a theory is publicly dismantled, it rarely recovers. The prosecutor advises patience, a word that lands heavily in a room full of people who have already given decades to this story. Patience feels like surrender when time has already stolen so much. But they agree. The case has waited this long. It can wait a little longer if waiting keeps the truth intact. Outside the precinct, the public narrative shifts again. Interest wanes slightly, replaced by new stories, new scandals, new fears. The cold case slips back toward the margins, but not all the way. It lingers in the cultural background, a reference point, a reminder. The phrase "lived next door" remains attached to it like a scar, shorthand for the unease it provokes. People bring it up in conversations about safety, about trust, about how little separation there really is between lives in a city. The woman's family feels the change immediately. Calls become less frequent. Updates less dramatic. They recognize the pattern. They've lived it before. Renewed attention followed by quiet. Hope rising, then settling into something heavier. They don't accuse. They don't plead. They endure. For them, the case isn't stalled, it's suspended, hovering in a space where resolution feels both closer than ever and impossibly far away. Investigators take one last pass through the man's history, not looking for what he did, but for who he was when no one was paying attention. Childhood records. Early friendships. Patterns of isolation or control. Nothing conclusive emerges. No smoking gun. Just a personality shaped by restraint, by boundaries, by an inward-facing life. The kind of person who could exist for years without leaving much of an impression. The kind of person who, if guilty, would have been perfectly suited to disappear someone else without being seen. The building is visited again, not officially, not as a crime scene, but as a place. A detective stands in the hallway alone, listening. The acoustics haven't changed. Sound still travels unpredictably. A radio from one apartment bleeds faintly into another. Footsteps echo, then vanish. It's easy to imagine how something could have happened here without becoming a spectacle. Easy and terrifying. The detective leaves without notes, carrying only the feeling that the space itself understands more than anyone ever will. As months pass, the case enters a waiting phase, not dormant, not closed, but coiled. Detectives check in occasionally, review new technologies, consider future possibilities. DNA science advances. Databases expand. What is impossible today may be routine tomorrow. This belief becomes both comfort and burden, a reason to keep the file alive, a reminder that justice is sometimes paced by innovation rather than will. The man next door continues his life under a quiet shadow. He is not charged. He is not cleared. He exists in between, a state that erodes certainty on both sides. If he is innocent, this limbo is its own punishment. If he is guilty, it is a testament to how thoroughly someone can outrun consequence by never drawing attention in the first place. The ambiguity is corrosive, but it is also honest. The case refuses to pretend it knows what it does not. As Part 7 closes, there is no breakthrough, no revelation waiting around the corner. Instead, there is a recognition, shared silently by everyone involved, that this cold case may not end with a single moment, but with a gradual narrowing, a future where one possibility remains standing simply because all others have fallen away. Until then, the mystery holds its ground, quiet, patient, lodged in the space between two apartments, between two lives, between what can be suspected and what can be said out loud, reminding the city that sometimes the most unsettling stories are not the ones that explode into view, but the ones that never quite let go. Part 8 opens not with movement, but with a question that has grown heavier over time. What does resolution look like when proof refuses to surface? The investigation enters a phase detectives rarely discuss publicly, the long middle distance where certainty erodes and instinct becomes the only compass left. They are no longer chasing a suspect. They are guarding a truth they can't yet speak. The man next door remains unchanged in status, but the case around him subtly rearranges itself, tightening not through action, but through elimination. One by one, alternative explanations lose oxygen, not disproven in a dramatic sense, but starved by the absence of support. The circle grows smaller, quieter, more uncomfortable. A retired detective from the original 1987 team returns to consult, his memory sharper for feelings than facts. He remembers the building more than the paperwork, the way the hallway felt, the unease he couldn't articulate at the time. He admits something he never put in a report, a hesitation he felt about the man next door that he dismissed as bias, as paranoia, as nothing he could justify. Back then, he believed answers would come. Now, decades later, that dismissed instinct resurfaces, not as evidence, but as a reminder that investigations are shaped as much by what officers allow themselves to doubt as by what they pursue. The case is quietly reviewed by an internal panel, not to close it, but to future-proof it. Every decision, every omission, every assumption is re-examined through a modern lens. Could anything have been done differently without the benefit of hindsight? The answer is both no and yes, an unsatisfying truth that hangs over the room. The panel concludes the same thing investigators already know: the case is viable, but fragile. One misstep could collapse the narrative they've carefully protected. For now, restraint remains the strategy. Outside, the city barely notices. New York has always had a talent for absorbing tragedy without stopping. The building blends into its block, anonymous again, the apartment long since altered by other lives. But for those who know the story, the place carries a charge. People lower their voices when they pass it. They glance up at the windows. They imagine radios, half-written notes, doors left ajar. The cold case lives on not as a headline, but as a rumor with weight. Investigators receive a development that is both promising and maddening. Advances in genetic genealogy offer a theoretical path forward, but only if there is a viable sample to work from. They inventory the evidence again, hoping something overlooked might qualify. The reality is harsh. The samples are too degraded, too limited, too compromised by time. The door cracks open, then closes. Progress remains just out of reach, visible enough to torment, distant enough to deny. The man next door ages quietly. Photographs of him now show a different person than the one from 1987, lines etched by time, hair thinning, posture softened. To some, this passage of time humanizes him, complicates the image of a predator frozen in youth. To others, it reinforces the fear that if he did this, he has already enjoyed decades the victim never had. Time becomes a character in the story, neither ally nor enemy, just an unrelenting force that changes everything except the question at the center. The woman's name surfaces again in an unexpected place, a brief mention in a documentary about unresolved disappearances. It's not detailed. It's not investigative. It's atmospheric. A reminder that some stories don't conclude, they linger. Her family watches, conflicted. They want attention, but not this kind, not the shallow retelling that trades depth for mood. Still, they understand the value of memory. Being remembered, even imperfectly, feels better than being forgotten entirely. Within the department, the case becomes something younger detectives are warned about, not as a failure, but as a lesson. They're told this is what happens when crimes are subtle, when violence doesn't announce itself, when the perpetrator, if there is one, understands restraint. They're told to listen harder, to trust discomfort, to document everything, even the things that feel intangible. Especially those things. The cold case becomes a training ground, shaping how future investigations will be handled, even if it never delivers its own resolution. A final attempt is made to re-engage the man next door, not through interrogation, but through conversation, a softer approach designed to bypass defenses built over decades. The meeting is cordial. He is polite. He is consistent. He expresses sympathy in careful language, distances himself without hostility. There is no crack, no slip, no moment that can be pointed to later and dissected. When it ends, everyone involved knows this may have been the last chance for something spontaneous, something human, to surface. It doesn't. As the case settles again, investigators confront an uncomfortable truth. They may be closer to understanding what happened than they will ever be to proving it. That gap becomes the defining feature of the story, the space where suspicion lives without confirmation. It's a space the law cannot occupy, but the mind cannot leave alone. The cold case exists there now, fully formed, resistant to closure. Part 8 closes with a quiet reckoning. The investigation remains open, but its urgency has transformed into vigilance. The man next door remains uncharged, but not unconsidered. The woman remains missing, her absence now part of the city's hidden architecture. And the mystery itself, worn smooth by years of attention, continues to endure, not screaming for answers, not begging for justice, but waiting, patiently, for a moment when time, technology, or chance finally decides to break the silence that has held since 1987. Part 9 begins with a realization that arrives quietly and refuses to leave. The case may never end with certainty, but it will always demand a reckoning. Investigators stop framing their work around a future arrest and begin framing it around stewardship, the responsibility of holding a truth in place until the world is ready to receive it. The file is no longer something to solve so much as something to guard, to keep intact against erosion, against forgetting, against the temptation to simplify what has never been simple. The man next door remains at the center of that gravity, a fixed point the case bends around even as time keeps moving. A new generation of detectives rotates in, trained on algorithms and analytics, fluent in data that older investigators once had to imagine. They approach the case with fresh detachment, testing assumptions, stress-testing timelines, running simulations that ask not what is likely, but what is possible. The results don't contradict the long-held theory. If anything, they refine it. The probability models favor proximity. Opportunity clusters where access is routine. The building's layout emerges again as a silent accomplice, its acoustics and habits creating cover where none was intended. Numbers don't prove guilt, but they sharpen intuition into something harder to ignore. The city experiences another small wave of interest when an anniversary passes, a round number that media can't resist. Old footage is replayed. The same photograph circulates. The same phrases return. Cold case, vanished without a trace, suspect lived next door. Commentators debate the ethics of implication, the danger of narrative gravity pulling an uncharged man into infamy. Others argue the greater danger is silence, that unanswered crimes rot the trust that holds communities together. The conversation burns briefly, then cools, leaving behind only the residue of unease. Inside the department, a difficult conversation takes place about legacy. What will this case be remembered as if it never resolves? A cautionary tale? A failure? Or a marker of restraint, proof that the system chose accuracy over appetite? The answer matters to the people who have spent their careers circling this mystery. They decide to document everything anew, not to change the outcome, but to preserve the reasoning, the doubts, the discipline. The case becomes a record not just of a disappearance, but of how seriously the question was taken. The man next door becomes aware, through small signs, that the case has entered a different phase. There are fewer inquiries, fewer rumors, but also fewer chances for absolution. The door to public exoneration never opens, and neither does the door to prosecution. He lives between them, a narrow corridor of ambiguity that mirrors the hallway where it all began. If he is innocent, that corridor is unjust. If he is guilty, it is a testament to how effective restraint can be. The truth remains sealed behind the same wall. The woman's family confronts time in a more personal way. Milestones pass without her. Generations change. The story of her disappearance becomes something that must be explained to people who never knew her, a narrative carried forward by obligation and love. They visit the city less often now, but when they do, they stand near the building and feel the same hollow pull. They do not ask what happened anymore. They ask what can still be done. The answer is small and painful. Remember, document, wait. Investigators revisit the concept of chance, the unpredictable element that cracks cases wide open after decades. A deathbed confession. A forgotten storage unit. A piece of evidence mislabeled and rediscovered. These things happen often enough to keep hope alive and rarely enough to feel cruel. They plan for it anyway, updating protocols, ensuring that if chance does arrive, it won't be squandered. Hope becomes procedural, less emotional, more durable. A quiet ethical debate emerges around the man next door's name, whether it should continue to be associated with the case in internal briefings, whether repetition itself becomes a kind of judgment. The decision is made to keep it, not as an accusation, but as a fact of proximity that cannot be erased. The line between fairness and honesty is thin here, and everyone involved feels it. They choose transparency within the system, restraint outside it. It's an imperfect compromise, but perfection has never been an option. Late one evening, a detective listens again to a recording from 1987, the faint hum of tape, the cadence of a younger voice answering simple questions. There is nothing there that wasn't there before. And yet, hearing it now, with decades layered on top, the detective feels the same chill that has followed this case from the beginning. Not fear. Recognition. The sense that some truths are audible only when you stop expecting them to announce themselves. Part 9 closes with a narrowing of possibilities that feels almost physical. The cold case stands intact, leaner, more defined, stripped of distractions, but still without a door forward. The man next door remains the closest answer without becoming the final one. The woman remains absent, her life a negative space the city learned to build around. And the investigation, steady and unspectacular, continues to do the one thing it can still do with integrity: hold the silence in place, refuse to fill it with convenience, and wait for the moment when something, anything, finally dares to speak. Part 10 carries a different weight, the kind that settles in when everyone involved understands they are approaching an ending, even if they don't know what kind. The investigation is no longer expanding or contracting. It is holding evidence, holding theory, holding silence. Detectives speak less about breakthroughs and more about thresholds, about what it would take to cross from suspicion into action, from narrative into law. That threshold remains visible and unreachable, like a door at the end of a hallway that never quite gets closer no matter how many steps you take. The man next door becomes a quieter presence in the file, not because he matters less, but because everything that can be said about him has already been said. His proximity, his access, his consistency, his silence. These facts are now fixed points, not lines of inquiry. Investigators stop asking new questions about him and start asking whether the system itself is capable of finishing a story like this. Cold cases, they know, don't always end with answers. Sometimes they end with decisions. A final comprehensive review is ordered, not to chase a miracle, but to ensure nothing remains unchecked. Every piece of evidence is handled again. Every note reread. Every assumption challenged one last time. It is an exhausting process, emotionally and intellectually, because it forces everyone to confront the limits of their work. When it concludes, the result is what they expected and feared. The case is strong in theory, weak in court, balanced on a knife edge that cannot support a charge without collapsing. The question becomes not who did this, but what responsibility remains. Can a case be considered active if it has nowhere to go? Can justice exist without a verdict? The answers vary depending on who you ask. Prosecutors speak of thresholds. Detectives speak of truth. The family speaks of absence. None of these perspectives cancel the others out. The woman's name appears again, this time in a quiet internal memo marking another year since her disappearance. No press release. No public statement. Just a line in a system that refuses to let her vanish completely. For the people who have carried her story this long, that matters. It is a small defiance against erasure, against the idea that time alone can close a case. The man next door is informed, indirectly, that the investigation has stabilized. There will be no immediate action. No charges. No exoneration. The message is not delivered ceremonially. It arrives through absence, through the slowing of contact, through the return of anonymity that never fully returns. He is older now, living in the long echo of a moment that may or may not define him. If he is innocent, this is the closest thing to relief he will ever receive. If he is guilty, it is the confirmation that silence has worked. Detectives wrestle with that possibility in private. The idea that someone could commit an act this absolute and carry it quietly for a lifetime is difficult to accept, not because it is rare, but because it contradicts the stories people tell themselves about guilt. They want remorse to surface. They want cracks. They want truth to behave dramatically. This case has taught them otherwise. It has taught them that restraint can be as powerful as violence, that absence can be more durable than evidence. The building remains unchanged, its significance invisible to those who don't know the story. New tenants pass through the apartment where the radio once played, unaware that their lives intersect with an unresolved history. Detectives stop visiting. There is nothing left to measure, nothing left to test. The space has given everything it can give. What remains is interpretation. As the case edges toward a procedural pause, not a closure, but a holding pattern that could last indefinitely, there is a quiet acknowledgement among those involved that this may be the final shape of the story. Not solved. Not forgotten. Suspended. The cold case becomes a permanent question mark, a reminder that some truths exist outside the reach of institutions built to contain them. Part 10 does not end with despair. It ends with clarity. The clarity that comes from knowing exactly where the limits are. The clarity of understanding that justice is not always an event. Sometimes it is a posture, a refusal to lie to oneself for the sake of comfort. The investigators have not failed. They have arrived at the edge and stopped rather than stepping into fiction. The man next door remains a shadow without a verdict. The woman remains missing, her life unresolved but not erased. The city moves on, as it always does, carrying the story quietly in its infrastructure, in its shared walls and thin hallways. And the cold case, now fully grown, takes its final form not as a puzzle waiting to be solved, but as an enduring truth the city must live beside, just as it always has on the other side of the wall. Part 11 arrives without ceremony, the way endings often do in real life, not with answers, but with acceptance sharpened by time. The case does not close. It settles. It finds its final posture not in a courtroom or a headline, but in the collective understanding of everyone who touched it and everyone who lived near it, physically or emotionally. The cold case becomes less a question and more a presence, something that occupies space without demanding resolution, something learned rather than solved. Inside the department, the file is placed where unsolved cases live, not buried, not elevated, simply preserved. It carries annotations from multiple generations of investigators, different handwriting, different language, all circling the same silence. New technologies will come, they always do, and when they arrive the case will be pulled again, held up to fresh light, tested against new possibilities. That promise remains. But for now, there is nothing left to do but keep the record honest. No forced conclusions. No convenient endings. Just the truth as far as it can be carried. The woman's name endures in that file, no longer just as a victim, but as a measure of restraint. Her disappearance becomes the reason procedures were rewritten, why instincts are now documented instead of dismissed, why proximity is weighed more carefully than it once was. She is remembered not only for how she vanished, but for what her absence taught the people who kept looking. In that way, she remains present, shaping outcomes she will never see. The man next door fades back into the city, not absolved, not accused, but permanently adjacent to a story that refuses to detach from him. His life continues in the narrow corridor between suspicion and silence. Every door he closes echoes differently now, even if no one else hears it. Whether he carries guilt or only the weight of association is a question the system cannot answer, and perhaps never will. The ambiguity follows him like a shadow that never quite aligns with the light. The building stands, indifferent and enduring, brick and mortar outliving memory, housing new lives unaware of the history embedded in its walls. Radios still play there. Notes are still written on counters and left unfinished for harmless reasons. Doors are still left ajar by accident. Ordinary life continues, which is both comforting and unsettling, because it proves how easily the extraordinary can be absorbed, how completely a place can move on while a question remains suspended inside it. For the city, the story becomes one more quiet scar, rarely spoken aloud, but never fully forgotten. It surfaces in conversations about trust, about neighbors, about the strange intimacy of shared walls. It lingers in the way people listen more closely now, in the way silence is no longer assumed to be harmless. The cold case reshapes behavior subtly, invisibly, the way unresolved things often do. There is no final revelation waiting at the end of this narrative. No confession breaking decades of quiet. No evidence emerging at the last second to reframe everything. What remains instead is something harder and more honest. The recognition that some mysteries do not yield to persistence alone. That some truths exist without witnesses. That justice is sometimes measured not by punishment, but by refusal to pretend. The investigation ends where it began, with a door, a wall, a silence that means more than it should. The radio from that night is long gone, but its echo remains, a symbol of how normal everything looked until it wasn't. A life disappeared. A community absorbed the shock. A cold case took root and never let go. And so the story concludes not with certainty, but with vigilance. The file stays open. The memory stays alive. The question remains intact. Somewhere between two apartments, between what can be proven and what can be known, the cold case continues to exist, not screaming for attention, not begging for closure, just waiting. Reminding anyone who listens that sometimes the most haunting stories are not the ones that end badly, but the ones that never truly end at all. Part 12 does not announce itself as an addition, because in a case like this there is no such thing as an extra chapter, only the continuation of something that never truly stopped. Time advances, not with urgency, but with quiet insistence, and the cold case adapts the way unresolved things always do, by embedding itself deeper into routine. The file remains open in theory and dormant in practice, a contradiction everyone involved has learned to live with. It sits on a shelf, but it is never at rest, because rest would imply completion, and completion has never belonged to this story. Years pass. Faces change. Some of the detectives who once carried the weight of this case retire, their badges turned in, their desks cleared, their memories becoming the last place where certain details still exist in full color. Before they leave, they brief those who will replace them, not just on facts, but on tone, on the things that don't translate well into reports. They talk about the hallway. They talk about the radio. They talk about the feeling you get when a theory makes too much sense to be comfortable. These warnings are given quietly, without drama, because this case has taught them that drama is rarely where truth lives. The woman's family grows smaller with time, not in love, but in numbers. Parents age. Siblings become elders. The disappearance shifts from a present pain to a carried one, something that has always been there and always will be. They mark anniversaries privately now. No press. No interviews. Just remembrance. They understand something the public often doesn't. That closure is not an event. It's a compromise, a way of living forward without answers while refusing to let go of the question entirely. The man next door becomes an old man. His name appears less frequently in internal discussions, not because its relevance has faded, but because nothing new attaches itself to it. He has outlived suspicion without escaping it. In some ways, that is its own sentence. In others, it is a mercy that only time can deliver. Those who still remember the case debate quietly whether justice delayed can become justice denied, or whether restraint itself is a form of justice when certainty is absent. There is no consensus. There never is. Technology continues its relentless advance, indifferent to human patience. Databases merge. Algorithms grow sharper. What once required intuition now requires processing power. Periodically, the case is pulled and run through systems that didn't exist before, its fragments tested against a world of new information. Each time, the result is the same. No contradiction. No confirmation. The silence holds. But with every pass, the confidence grows that if the truth ever becomes detectable, this case will be ready to recognize it. The building remains, increasingly ordinary as the city reshapes itself around it. Renovations come and go. Tenants cycle through. None of them know the full story, and those who do know rarely speak of it. The apartment where it all began has been remodeled more than once, walls repainted, floors replaced, history sealed beneath layers of improvement. Yet something intangible lingers, not as a haunting, but as awareness, a sense that spaces remember even when people don't. Occasionally, a new detective stumbles onto the case late at night, flipping through old files out of curiosity rather than assignment. They read the reports, study the photographs, trace the logic, and almost always arrive at the same point. The man next door. The shared wall. The absence of struggle. The quiet. They feel the same chill their predecessors felt, the same pull toward an answer that refuses to solidify. And in that moment, the case renews itself, not through action, but through recognition. The cold case becomes part of institutional memory, cited in training, referenced in policy discussions, used as an example of why investigators are taught to document discomfort as carefully as evidence. It changes how questions are asked, how assumptions are challenged, how proximity is treated not as coincidence, but as context. In this way, the woman's disappearance continues to shape outcomes, influencing cases that will never bear her name. There is a temptation, as time stretches on, to mythologize the story, to turn it into something larger than it was, more elaborate, more theatrical. Those closest to it resist that impulse. They know the truth, if it exists, is likely small, contained, painfully human. Not a mastermind. Not a spectacle. Just a moment where access, impulse, and silence aligned. That restraint keeps the case grounded, even as it ages into legend. At some point, someone will be the last person alive who remembers the night it happened as news rather than history. That moment will pass without notice. The case will not end then. It will simply shift again, from lived memory to recorded one. And even then it will persist, because unanswered questions have a way of surviving their witnesses. Part 12 does not close the story. It reinforces what the story has always been. A life interrupted. A truth suspected. A silence respected because breaking it without certainty would create a different kind of harm. The cold case remains what it has become over decades, not a failure, not a success, but a testament to the limits of knowing and the discipline required to accept those limits without surrendering to them. Somewhere in New York, walls are shared tonight. Radios play softly. Doors close without locking into anything final. And beneath the noise of the city, beneath the movement and the forgetting, the cold case continues to exist exactly where it always has, in the narrow, uneasy space between proximity and proof, reminding anyone willing to listen that not all stories are meant to resolve. but all of them demand to be remembered. Part 13 unfolds like an echo rather than a step forward, the sound of something long past bouncing faintly off new walls. The case enters a phase no one plans for, but everyone eventually recognizes, the era when it no longer belongs to any one investigator, family member, or generation, but to the city itself. It becomes woven into the background knowledge of New York, not famous enough to be folklore, not fresh enough to be urgent, yet persistent enough to resist disappearance. The cold case survives the way certain streets survive, renamed, repainted, rerouted, but never truly erased. A small administrative change triggers a familiar ritual. The department migrates its archives to a new system, digitizing what was once paper, scanning photographs that have curled at the edges, converting tapes whose magnetic memory is beginning to fail. The woman's file is processed again, line by line, artifact by artifact. Nothing new emerges, but nothing is lost either. The act itself feels symbolic, a recommitment to preservation over progress, a recognition that even if answers never arrive, the record must remain intact, waiting. Younger analysts notice something their predecessors couldn't afford to dwell on: how consistent the silence is. Not just from the man next door, but from the case itself. No chaotic spikes. No contradictory trails. No sudden deviations. It is a straight, quiet absence, uninterrupted. That kind of consistency, they note, is rare. Crimes usually ripple outward, disturbing other parts of a life, leaving collateral traces. This one did not. Whatever happened was contained, disciplined, almost surgical in its restraint. The observation is unsettling, not because it changes anything, but because it reinforces everything that has already been suspected. The woman's story resurfaces briefly in an academic context, cited in a study about urban disappearances and the psychology of proximity. Her name is one among many, anonymized, contextualized, abstracted into data points. The family is informed out of courtesy. They approve. They have learned that meaning sometimes travels through places they never intended. If her disappearance can help others understand risk, silence, or prevention, then it has at least resisted total futility. Still, seeing her life reduced to variables stings in ways no headline ever did. The man next door does not appear in that study. He remains a shadow outside formal conclusions, present in implication but absent in print. This omission is deliberate, a nod to the boundary that has never been crossed. Even now, even this late, restraint governs the narrative. It is the one rule the case has never broken. Occasionally, a rumor surfaces, usually online, usually from someone claiming second-hand knowledge, a friend of a friend who heard something years ago. Each rumor is checked. Each one collapses. The process is automatic now, efficient, unemotional. The cold case has taught the system how to filter noise without becoming numb to possibility. That balance, fragile and hard-earned, may be its greatest legacy. The building changes again. Another renovation. Another owner. The hallway where so much imagination has lingered is brightened, widened slightly, modernized. The wall between the two apartments is reinforced to meet new codes. Thicker now. More soundproof. A practical improvement that carries an unintended irony. Whatever once passed through that space would not pass now. The past remains sealed on its side of the drywall. For those who know the story, this detail lands with quiet weight. It feels like a metaphor no one asked for. The present correcting a vulnerability the past exploited. Too late to matter. Just in time to remind. Within the department, the case reaches a kind of equilibrium. It is no longer actively pursued, but it is never closed. Its status is reviewed at regular intervals, a procedural heartbeat that confirms its continued existence. Detectives assigned to it learn quickly that their role is custodial rather than heroic. They are caretakers of a question, not conquerors of it. That mindset changes how they see their work, how they measure success. The city continues to produce new mysteries, louder ones, messier ones, cases that demand immediate answers and deliver them with varying degrees of satisfaction. Against that noise, this cold case grows quieter, but also clearer. Its outline sharpens as distractions fall away. What remains is the simplest version of the story. A woman disappeared from her home. No signs of force, no evidence of escape, no confirmed witness, and a neighbor close enough to matter forever. As years stack upon years, the idea of resolution begins to feel less important than the idea of vigilance. The lesson hardens into policy, into instinct, into training that emphasizes attention to the ordinary. Investigators are taught that danger does not always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like routine. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. Part 13 does not move the story forward. It presses it deeper. Deeper into memory. Deeper into infrastructure. Deeper into the collective understanding of how fragile certainty can be. The cold case no longer waits for a knock at the door or a confession whispered too late. It waits for alignment, for the rare moment when truth and proof decide to occupy the same space. Until then, it remains what it has always been. A life interrupted. A silence maintained. A wall that once separated two apartments and now separates what is known from what can be said. And in that narrow space, unchanged by time but sharpened by it, the cold case continues, patient, unresolved, and impossible to forget. Part 14 settles into the story like a long exhale, the moment after everyone realizes the case has outlived urgency and learned how to survive without it. The cold case no longer waits for rescue. It has become self-sustaining, anchored in procedure, memory, and an unspoken agreement that some truths are guarded, not chased. The city has changed its skyline again, cranes rising where old buildings once stood, but the disappearance remains untouched by development, immune to reinvention. It exists outside trends, outside cycles, fixed in the year it began and carried forward intact. A minor administrative event brings the case briefly back into motion. A box of archived property from the late 80s is discovered during a routine audit, mislabeled, untouched for years. It's not dramatic. No one runs. No alarm sound. But when the contents are laid out on a table, gloved hands hovering over brittle paper